In Measure of a Man, the question of whether Data is a person or is simply a piece of property is brought to the forefront. The question is, does this episode brilliantly show that bigotry can exist even in the 24th century, or is it simply an episode that utilizes the false equivalency fallacy to push a narrative? While there are allusions to slavery, that is simply a symptom of the issue presented. Is something not human, or in this case, something not sentient, worth as much as something that is human or something that is sentient? After all, did they ever really prove Data was something other than an adult's plaything? One of the most disturbing issues about the TNG episode Measure of a Man is what we see occur in the background. Ultimately, the show revolves around determining if Data has the same rights as all other sentient beings. When we see what leads up to this, at no point does Starfleet Command, nor the Judge Advocate General, treat Data with respect or give him any chance of survival. In fact, in my opinion, the entire court case, which we'll discuss later, is little more than a kangaroo court that Picard happened to win. For the purposes of this analysis, we will only be looking at the plot that involves Data, which ironically starts with Random Admiral 7652. I call him that because we never get a name in the episode. I'm sure he has one, we just don't get it, as far as I can tell at least. Let me know if they say it in the episode. The Admiral introduces Bruce Maddox, a science officer and the one everyone will be hating for the rest of the episode. In the first few scenes, we see that the Admiral advises Picard that Maddox will be working on what the Admiral calls the quote-unquote android. He further advises Picard to please take care of it, meaning the situation. Now let's sit back and think about that for a moment. Starfleet Command receives a request from Maddox, who's in their robotics division, to begin working and disassembling another member of Starfleet. We don't see what happens behind the scenes here, but with the flippant nature of the Admiral telling Picard what is going to happen, as if Data was a console on the bridge of the Enterprise, it doesn't really feel like this was a big deal to any of the Admiralty that looked at it. Now, some may try to argue that perhaps Starfleet Command did have this quandary, but it was decided he was property ultimately. If that were true, you would think that maybe the Admiral might have handled it a bit more gently. You know, given that the crew might feel that Data was a person. But no, it's more likely they simply saw a request to work on a machine and granted it, no more than doing an upgrade to the Enterprise's computer core. However, this flippant attitude by the Admiral has broader implications on how Starfleet Command doesn't care about their own policies. Later in the episode, we learn that Data was brought before either a hearing or multiple committees to determine if he was a sentient being. So, let's not be confused here. Starfleet has already decided on whether Data is sentient or not. He was found to be a sentient being, meaning he was a citizen of the Federation and would be accepted as a Starfleet officer. This is all information Starfleet Command would have had, and ultimately, they decided to ignore it. In my last long-form series, I discussed the trial of Tarsus in The Drumhead. Remember, Tarsus lied on his application. He lied to Starfleet. But in this episode, you have Starfleet disregarding the very process it held Tarsus accountable for. If what is placed on the application for Starfleet, if what Starfleet decides, if that process doesn't matter, then someone owes Tarsus a very, very big apology. But ignore what Starfleet had already determined to be true they would, and Maddox would make his case to Picard to take Data. What strikes me in the conversation between Picard, Maddox, Riker, and Data is that Maddox seems to only be stopped because he really has no idea how to work on Data. I may be a bit sensitive here, but I don't think operating on anyone should really be an option. In theory, there are rules and laws against cutting someone open to explore or do experiments if there is a good chance they will die. Hell, even if there's a moderate to good chance they will live, it's still largely illegal. It's something that our society doesn't generally do, and I would expect this utopia to be no different, but apparently I'm wrong on that score. Historically, I've been pretty harsh with Picard and the rest of the crew regarding their initial beliefs about Data. However, while I still think they, or at least Picard, act aberrantly, I'm not as critical in retrospect. During this day and age, in the real world, there are times that we have to be reminded that even though something appears to be the way it isn't. Just because I feel Clementine in Telltale's The Walking Dead is a child that deserves protecting, that doesn't mean she's actually a child. Ultimately, she's little more than a voice actress and a picture. She's not real. And when I get passionate about the character, that doesn't mean I can't feel that way, but I have to keep everything in perspective. Also, contrary to popular opinion and what this TNG episode wants to tell us, intelligent androids that can mimic human personalities is not unique. We have seen lifelike androids that can pass off as human in Star Trek before. We see several androids in the original series, the most notable being iMud, but there are others. We even see androids in a show that may or may not be in the same timeline as we see here with an android officer on the USS Discovery. I'd say her name, but we all know that I would get it wrong, and you'd point it out in the comments how much I suck. So I'll just point it out so you can point out this part instead of pointing out the mispronunciation so that we can mix it up with our back and forth. I'd hate for my relationship with the commenters to get stale. Anyway, back on topic, all that to say, Starfleet has dealt with androids before and even those as advanced as Data. So would it be any surprise that Starfleet Command then says it's okay to disassemble him? Would it be any surprise that they simply authorize having him transferred under Maddox? It's no more surprising to me, at least, that they do this than having the USS Enterprise transferred to the command of another officer. The simple fact is, there is no reason for anyone who hasn't interacted with Data to believe he is little more than a machine. And for those keyboard warriors, yes, I realize that I just presented a contradiction. On one hand, I talk about how dark it is that Starfleet Command could just order a Starfleet officer be operated on. And then I point out that there's no reason for them not to do it to Data based on what they know. But that's this entire episode in a nutshell. It's complicated. Sure, this episode would like us to think that it's clear and cut. It's simply not. Humanity, and I'd wager any sentience that exists in this universe, will innately create a hierarchy of betters and those who are less than. We have that today, both within the human species and how we consider our fellow creatures that are animals just like us in this entire kingdom. Back to what I was saying, the crew would interact with Data so much that they began to think of him as an equal. This is contrary to what most sentients of the universe would think, which is that he's an android. Nothing more, nothing less. Though Discovery presents some interesting problems that we'll delve into later, every other instance in the universe of Star Trek up to this point, androids were always treated as machines. So the crew, or at least Picard, now being reminded of that isn't out of the ordinary. It's an oh yeah moment for them. And I've stated it before, but this isn't unreasonable. Every other piece of technology is treated the same as Data is here. We'll discuss it more later when we talk about the trial, but a lot of the technology that Starfleet has is on par with Data. This includes, but is not limited to, Galaxy-class starships, starbases, and even exocomps. But let's put that aside for now. Moving on with the episode, Picard has a meeting with Data. And honestly, the way he treats Data here, if we assume Data is a sentient being, is horrifying. He points out that he hates that he is losing Data on the ship, that Data was valuable. And then when Data tells him he won't submit to the procedure, well, what Picard says is just aberrant. Picard states that he has to consider Starfleet's interest in this entire affair. Like I said, he has been reminded that Data is simply a tool. He states how important it is that many more Datas be constructed. And of course, we all know what the counter is. Data points out that it would be more helpful to Starfleet if all humans were required to pluck out their eyes and have them replaced with enhanced visual tools, such as Geordi's. For Picard, this is a gotcha moment, but the more I watch it, the less impressed I am with the analogy. Look, if my computer could talk to me and I tell it I'm going to put more RAM into it and then maybe take a look around, see if I can make another computer, but there is a chance that it'll lose its memories and I might destroy it. It telling me that if I augmented my brain with circuitry, it would make me a better human doesn't really make the value of the computer any more or any less. I'm human, so that's apples to oranges. And that would have been Maddox's answer to Data if Data had said it to him. He's not sentient, it's not apples to apples. Now, I'll give the benefit of the doubt to Picard here. Perhaps he's able to see more in Data, and thus that's why he doesn't consider it apples to oranges. And indeed, I would probably agree that it is more apples to apples, but we're looking at it from what the universe would see. While you and I might think Data is a real person, there's no reason for anyone else to actually believe that. And if that's true, that just means that Maddox and Starfleet Command are ignorant. They're not necessarily evil. Maddox gets a bad rap in this episode, but to be honest, there is no person watching this, as of the upload of the video at least, that would consider a person who calls their phone or computer alive sane. I'll grant that the computer and phone are not on par with Data, but Data is on par with the Starship Enterprise, or the main computer of DS9. In fact, the next scene we see shows how indignant Maddox acts about Picard trying to give rights to Data. It would be the same as someone trying to give rights to a laptop. His indignation isn't wholly without merit in universe. So why would Data have the same rights as Picard? If it's because they are so similar, what about Space Dock? Space Dock is similar to Picard, it's similar to Data. And if you say yes, that both Space Dock and Data have rights, what about a communicator? A chair that can move you around? Where does it begin and where does it stop? Let's make no mistake here, you can't argue that the Enterprise D is on par with Data in every respect, and is able to pass the same tests that he did. I'm not going to delve too deeply right here, we'll get into that in the next episode, but let's assume I'm right for a moment. If I am right, then does Data still have rights? And if he does, that has a huge impact on Starfleet operations. Maddox calls it ignorance to give Data rights, and based on what he believes, he's not wrong. From his perspective, and that of most of the universe, Picard is acting ignorantly. Now again, I am attempting to present both sides of the argument. I've given some clue, but I haven't really talked about what I believe because it doesn't matter. What matters is how the universe takes Data, takes AI. And honestly, the only real leg to stand on is that Data is a Starfleet officer. He was already deemed to be a sentient person. You can't say that of any other technology. Not Space Dock, not the Enterprise, not Deep Space Nine. That's really the only basis they have here in my opinion. But we will take a look at the court case and see what they come up with. While I know most people hate it, this is going to be a two-parter. Don't worry, no 5-episode series, just one more. I wanted to set the stage and discuss the background so that I could fully go into the court trial itself. Needless to say, it's a lot more cringy than even the drumhead.